What you believe will shape your life more than reality ever will. Fear is one of the enemy's most effective tools, and it is powerful because it is believed. In this episode, I will break down how dysfunctional core beliefs create fear, avoidance, and prideful overcompensation using schema therapy and scripture side by side. Fear isn't just an emotion, it's often a belief you've been living from. So let me explain. Welcome everybody to the Ease Your Mind podcast. My name is Christina Adrian. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, licensed professional counselor, and I help you break free from anxiety, fear, and shame by teaching you powerful tools rooted in scripture and psychology, healing minds, restoring faith, and renewing purpose. There is a form of therapy I like to use a lot in my practice called schema therapy, which was created by psychologist Jeffrey Young. Schema is a core belief that creates dysfunctional patterns and habits in our lives. It affects how we see ourselves, the world, and other people. So I often like to use schema therapy, especially when people are dealing with or struggling with their relationships in their marriages or any romantic partner, with their family, with their friends, because more times than not, there's a schema there that can give more information as to the patterns that you're noticing in those relationships and even the relationship you notice in yourself. So for example, if someone has a failure schema, their core belief is going to be that I am a failure. And I am statements are always identity statements. Whatever you say about yourself, and if it starts with the word I am, then it's an identity statement. And this is something that you're claiming for yourself. When we say I am stupid, I am smart, we are attaching an identity to ourselves, and we should be very careful with how we talk to ourselves and how we talk to other people too. Because once you start using the words I am and this identifier gets into place, and when we don't make that separation, this is why shame then develops and we start to have self-hatred that starts to develop. So going back to schema therapy helps us understand these patterns and core beliefs. So the example that I was giving is that if you have a failure schema, then your core belief will be that I am a failure. This will then affect how you work, how you interact with other people, and how you feel about yourself. If I believe that I am a failure, I'm probably not going to put that much of an effort into my schoolwork or whatever work that I am doing because of this belief that I have about myself. If I feel that I am a failure, many times I'm going to try to cover it up with my friends because I don't want them to see that. And this is what leads to the overcompensation, which I will go into more details later. And the reason why I like schema therapy, because it really does help get to the root of why people behave the way they behave, think the way they think. I do not believe that things just happen just because they happen. I do believe that there is a root and a reason for everything. And as a therapist, I do feel like it is my job to help you get to that understanding of why these things are happening. And schema therapy has been one of the many therapies that I have learned that has helped me a lot in helping clients get to that place. What's blocking your inner peace? Are you not sure why you feel stuck, overwhelmed, or disconnected? Do you have thoughts constantly running through your mind and ruminating and causing a lot of anxiety? Are you lacking peace in your mind, emotions, not understanding who you are, and struggling to understand the purpose in your life and who God called you to be? I created a quiz to help reveal the root cause, to understand what it is that needs to be dealt with. Is it coming from the mind and the way you're thinking? Is it coming from your heart and your emotions? Is it a soul issue or is it a spirit issue? This can help you to understand exactly where you need to begin your healing journey. Click the link below to take the quiz to start to see where your healing journey needs to begin. Now back to the show. There are 3 behaviors that perpetuates the patterns and the core beliefs. There are maladaptive schemas and there are also adaptive schemas. So there's negative ones and positive ones. Now, of course, because in the nature of therapy, we only focus on the negative ones because obviously the positive ones don't need to change. But when it comes to the maladaptive schemas, there's about 18 different kinds. Now, if you score high on a lot of them, it can seem very overwhelming. However, we don't focus on each one because each one is perpetuated by 3 behaviors. As long as you've changed the way that you react to these schemas, then many times the schema will just change. So the 3 behaviors are avoidance, surrender, and overcompensation. Most people, I would say, fall into avoidance or overcompensation. I would say not all exhibit all 3, but most people I would say exhibit all 3, but still have a leaning more towards avoidance or overcompensation. But however, surrender is always present because surrender means that you just kind of give into the schema. You're giving into whatever it says. So usually if you're giving into whatever it says, it's probably going to lead you towards avoidance of fear or overcompensation, which overcompensation is also driven by fear. But let me talk about avoidance first. So avoidance is always caused by some level of fear. And how many of us have fears? I'm sure we all do. I know definitely I do. We might have fear of taking risks, fear of poverty, fear of being homeless, fear of bugs, fear of flying, fear of heights. Avoidance always leads to a dissatisfied life. I have never met anybody who avoids everything and anything in their life and they are satisfied. Because most of the things in life that you want, the things you want to pursue, is going to require you to probably do something that's going to stretch you outside your comfort zone a bit. And if you're not willing to do that, then most likely you're going to stay in the norm, and then you won't be able to grow that you want the way that you want to grow. Now, fear is normal until it becomes anxiety. Anxiety is excessive worry, not just a typical normal level of worry that we might have for different everyday things. And anxiety also comes about when it's not a real threat, but the brain has been trained to believe that there is a real threat. And that's the difference between fear and anxiety. Fear happens when we have a threat that is around us. But when we start to perceive a threat, that's when it turns into anxiety. So anxiety is fueled by fear, but it's not always exactly the same thing, which is why many times it's often said that they're not exactly the same, but they are closely related. They are siblings. Avoidance always intensifies anxiety and fear. Many times when we avoid situations, we think it's helping because in the moment we get that relief, but it quietly grows into the anxiety because when we're trying to escape, when we're running away from that said thing or avoiding said thing, we are training our brain to be fearful of this thing. So we're training our mind and our brain to believe that whatever it is that we're avoiding is actually a threat. And many times it is the avoidance itself that is keeping us very anxious, overwhelmed, and stuck. Avoidance feels safe at the time, but it is secretly feeding your fear and it's destroying your peace. The more you avoid a hard conversation, a task, a decision, or a truth, the louder your anxiety becomes. Let's say I am a young man. I'm going to use not myself as an example. Let's say I'm a young man and I'm trying to learn how to talk to and approach a woman. Now, if every single time I avoid it, what you're training your brain to believe is that I should not do this task. Maybe because of fear of rejection, maybe you're afraid of how the person's going to react, whatever it might be. Whenever you avoid the situation, your brain registers that into your wiring as this needs to be avoided. So the next time the situation comes up, it's going to amp the anxiety up because it knows that the anxiety will make you not do this. Because the brain is designed for survival. It's designed to also comfort. But many times comfort can be a killer, but it's designed to make us comfortable and it's designed for our survival. So if you told the brain to be afraid of whatever it is you told it to be afraid of social situations, to be afraid of talking to women, to be afraid of whatever it might be, then every time that thing is you are presented with it is going to increase the anxiety to keep you from doing it because the brain thinks that it's keeping you away from danger because you trained it to think that these things are dangerous. But the thing is, they're not dangerous. And this is why I said in the beginning that your fear and what you believe will control your life more than reality. Because most of the time, it doesn't matter how reality is. As long as you train yourself to believe certain things, then that's how your brain will operate. Most people who I speak to who have a fear of flying logically know that statistically speaking, driving a car is way more dangerous than flying. But that doesn't change their fear. Most of the time, we erroneously think that reality and facts is what's going to change a person from believing something. Sometimes, depending on who you're talking to, sometimes the facts can be what helps changes a person. I've seen people who are presented with the facts about Christianity and it does change their mind. But I've seen people who are presented with the facts about Christianity and it does not change their mind. Why? Because they don't actually care about the facts. They might say that they care about the facts because I hear that oftentimes with atheists. They might say that they care about the facts, but however, when you present the facts to them, they'll find a reason to not accept it. And even one time too, which I thought was hypocritical because this one atheist I was listening to said he was a Christian. He stopped being a Christian because he said that he saw facts that made him believe that Christianity was not true. Then the interviewer asked him, so if I was able to show you facts that showed you that what you was reading was actually wrong and it's facts that shows Christianity is true, would you believe? He said, no, that's not what it's about. It's like, yeah, but that was what it was about when you decided to leave Christianity. Now, all of a sudden, when it comes to understanding Christianity, that's not what it's about. That's very hypocritical. But a lot of people think in this way because the thing is, at the end of the day, they don't want to believe. Now, somebody who's really truly seeking truth is seeking knowledge. When you do present it with them, that's one of the reasons why their heart might change and start to believe in Jesus Christ because they actually were seeking. They were not just seeking for things to go attack to attack the faith and be against the faith, they were actually someone seeking truth. And people who are seeking truth, like truly seeking truth, they will listen to the things that you are telling them and receive it. Now, for those people who are not seeking the truth, many times the facts are really not going to do something, and there's a different approach that you have to take in order to reach them. But this is just another example of how facts are not exactly what people need to change. So that's also a very false thing that people tend to believe. Many people who believe in evolution and all these other things always like to think that they're believing in facts, but it's not facts in reality because none of them have seen any of these things happen. But yet, however, they believe so hard in the fact that we were created from monkeys, that the earth was created out of nothing. And they believe it so much that you would think that they saw it happen. Like you would think that it was something that they witnessed with their own eyes, but they didn't. However, when you say you believe in Jesus Christ, they'll ask silly questions like as if like, well, you never met Jesus. It's like, okay, well, you never seen a monkey turn into a human being, but yet you believe that. You've never seen something come from nothing, but yet somehow you've allowed people to convince you that that could be the case. People many times think that facts and reality is what they need to believe something, but that is not true. And also nobody believes in anything with 100% facts. Even as a believer, there are certain things that I accept that I can't not prove 100%. Can I 100% prove to you that God is real? Not 100%, but you also cannot 100% prove that God is not real. But my point is that no one believes in anything with 100% facts. So whenever people tell you they need 100% facts to believe something, that's a lie, because I can guarantee you there's something that they believe in their life that they do not have 100% facts on. So back to what I was saying about reality and fear. When I was using the example of people who are afraid of planes, many times they are cognitive of the fact that there's nothing to really be afraid of, or the fact that they're driving is actually more dangerous. But however, it is not just the facts alone that helps change a certain fear that a person has, because fear is deep rooted in our emotions. It is deep rooted in our wiring ring and our beliefs. So we have to change the belief in order to get rid of the fear. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, which is one of my favorite scriptures, it says, "The Lord does not give us the spirit of fear, but a love, power, and a sound mind." So if the Lord does not give us fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind, then it's safe to say that fear takes away our love, power, and a sound mind. Now, how? Well, it takes away our power because whenever you're fearful, you're going to be paralyzed. It paralyzes you in some way, stops you in some way, and that you cannot move. So you cannot walk in the power that God gave you in your life. It just takes away your power to make abilities and choices. So now if you're someone who are afraid of flying, you can't make the choice of going anywhere or traveling around the world. Let's say some people don't care. They become content with that. But let's say you were somebody who liked to travel and liked to see the world, but then this fear came upon you. Now it's taken away your will. It's taken away your volition. Now your power is taken away from you. And of course, it takes away your sound mind, because anyone who's living in fear does not have peace of mind. You do not have peace in your mind, and your mind is probably ruminating on this fear and thinking about this fear. And anxiety takes away your peace of mind, and it causes a lot of stress. And it takes away your love. This one was harder for me to understand, how fear and love is connected. And there's a scripture, I believe, I think it's in 1 John. Yeah, 1 John chapter 4, verse 18. It says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love." Which I thought was interesting when I first read it. I was like, fear has to do with punishment. But when you think about it, fear does feel like punishment. It's very torturous whenever we're going through whatever it is that we're fearful of. Most people will say that their fear is taking away their peace, and not only that, it's taking away their joy. Fear takes away all these three things. But another thing that this scripture tells us is that fear is a spirit. So fear, yes, there is a normal part of fear that I was talking about. It's built into our system because we need it. There is a healthy level of fear. We need fear to be ignited when we see a lion, tiger, or bear, because it is that fear that gets ignited in us that tells us that we need to run. The flight, fight, freeze mode in our mechanism is actually a helpful mechanism. It can be affected by trauma. So then now it's kind of like out of whack, so to speak. So now you're reacting in flight, fight, freeze mode for things that are not actually a threat, but the mind sees it as a threat because of the trauma that it went through. We have the parasympathetic and the sympathetic parts of our nervous system. The sympathetic part of our nervous system is the one that gets triggered during stress, and that's what then triggers the flight, fight, and freeze mode. And there is also the parasympathetic. That's the one that ignites the calm after the fearful event happened. Now, many times when people are dealing with trauma and they're triggered, the sympathetic part of them is usually heightened and heightened sometimes for too long of a period of time. And one of the works that we're doing in therapy is learning how to utilize the parasympathetic and put that online more to help calm down your body and your nerves. Many times people could be dealing with physical pain and sicknesses because their body's always at a sympathetic level. Their sympathetic nervous system is always heightened and never gets that sense of calm, which then causes affliction and problems in your body and also in your mind. When it comes to your body and what's actually happening during a fearful moment, all these things are actually needed. So apparently your vision changes because you're getting tunnel vision. Your vision is becoming sharper whenever you are in stress or in trauma. But this is to help you so you can have a sharper vision so that in case you need to run. Your mouth gets dry in this situation because it's diverting the mouth is part of the digestive system, and the digestion shuts down during dangerous situations as energy is diverted toward the muscles. So it's trying to bring more energy into the muscles in case you need to fight or you need to run. Your heart is beating faster as well to enhance your ability to fight or to run away. Your adrenaline glands, the nausea that you're feeling in your stomach is also part of your digestive system and your digestive system, which is also why it's feeling that effect. When you're thinking quicker, it helps us to evaluate danger and make rapid decisions. Now, the thing is, because the emotional part of our brain takes away our problem-solving part of our mind, many times our thoughts can get clouded when we are in these stressful situations, when we don't know how to regulate well. Because you can be in a stressful situation, but because you have good regulation, you can regulate your emotion in a way that allows you to think clearly during this fearful situation. Because I have seen people, when they're in a fearful situation, they can really clearly think it through and decide, okay, what do we need to do to get out of the situation? While there are some people, when they're in a fearful situation, they're just a hot mess. They don't know what to do. They're panicking. And that's because one person probably knows how to regulate their emotions well and are able to regulate their emotions in a fearful situation so that they can think it through, while the other person probably doesn't know how. So now the fact that their prefrontal cortex is now lower because of the high emotional state that they're in, they cannot make a sound decision. And even when it comes to the shallow breathing that sometimes happens, that's to take in more oxygen to help with your body also, again, with getting prepared to run or to fight. So all these changes that happens to our body whenever we are triggered are actually happening because your brain is seeing what's happening as a threat. Your body's reacting in all the ways that it needs to react in order to prepare you to run or to fight. Now, when it comes to trauma, this can get confusing because we know that there's not a threat. We know that, but the thing is, your brain don't know the difference between what's imagined and what's real. So what happens is when you have a flashback of whatever abuse happened to you in the past, the mind registers it as this is something that's happening now. So your body's reacting that same way. But you logically know that there was no real threat. You was just, for example, arguing with your boyfriend, and maybe he said something, and now you're reacting in this certain way. And you get mad at your body for reacting this certain way because you think that it is irrational. But the brain is doing what it's supposed to do because it felt a threat. Something in this environment reminded it of the threat from the past. So that's why it's reacting in a certain way, because it's going to react in a way to help you to run or to fight. This is one of the reasons why often in psychology, especially when it comes to somatic therapies, it's often discussed to partner with your body and your mind. Don't fight it. Don't get angry at it. The mind and the body is doing what it thinks it's supposed to do to protect you and to help you. Fighting against it is just going to make it worse. And it's just going to make it difficult for you to have that proper integration with your whole self. Instead, partner with it and try to understand why it's doing what it's doing, but then doing the work to rewire it to no longer see these things as a threat. So therefore, it's no longer reacting to these things like it's a threat. But however, your body's not working against you. It's actually working for you. It's just not doing the right thing because it has the wrong information. And this is part of the work that we do in therapy, rewiring your beliefs and your assumptions and your perceptions so that your mind can now have the proper information to evaluate present situation properly and not be informed by past trauma. And that your past trauma is no longer making decisions for things that has just a little resemblance of what happened in the past. So I just wanted to share that so you could get an understanding of what's happening to your body in case you are someone listening who's dealing with trauma and experience some of these symptoms in your body. Know that your body is not attacking you. It's not working against you. It's doing all these things because it's preparing itself to fight or run because it thinks that there's a threat around. This whole system shows us that fear is normal. If I see a lion, tiger, or bear, I need my body to do all those things that I just mentioned so that it can be prepared to run or it can be prepared to fight. Now, that's the fear that we have that's actually helpful for us, and God designed it in us to help us in those situations. Then 2 Timothy chapter 1, though, verse 7 is telling us that fear can also be a spirit. It's a spirit that can come into us to make us believe a lie. Fear is always accompanied by a lie. And this goes into the third maladaptive behavior I was speaking of, which is surrender. When you surrender to the schema, you're just believing whatever lie that it tells you. If you have the failure schema, then you're just going to go with it and believe the lie that you are a failure. And you're going to follow suit and behave like somebody who believes that they are a failure. And then this will lead to avoidance, or it can lead to overcompensation. Overcompensation is also led by fear, because usually when someone's overcompensating, they're trying to cover up something that they're afraid of someone seeing. So overcompensation is a defense mechanism when an individual exaggerates a behavior that is the opposite of a perceived insecurity or weakness, and they're trying to hide it. It's an exaggerated attempt to overcome feelings of inferiority or inadequacy by overdoing something else to an excessive degree. This often stems from childhood experiences and can manifest in various ways. This can lead to very aggressive behavior to try to dominate others or dominate in some type of way that cover up your feelings of past weaknesses. So this is one of the reasons why I say it's also led by fear, because it's led by the fear that people will see your insecurities, see your inadequacies, see your failures and mistakes. And because I'm afraid of people seeing this, I'm going to exaggerate and overcompensate so that I can cover it up. We see this many times with excessive behavior that people have. Some people who are bullied become bullies themselves because they want to show this feeling of strength and power that they did not have as a child. So they start to overcompensate and also become extremely aggressive and bully others because of this perceived weakness that they had from being bullied as a child. Sometimes people overcompensate by giving their children everything because they lack when they were a child. Or they might give their child everything because they lack in spending quality time or emotionally supporting their child. So because they know they can't be there for their child, they'll buy the child everything that they need and overcompensate with gifts because of the lack that they have when it comes to showing up emotionally for their child. Sometimes we see this also in romantic relationships when partners are having issues in their relationship, and let's say maybe they're cheating on each other, whatever it might be, but they will display on social media as if they are the perfect couple. And people many times will fall on this. And this is why they always say, don't trust what you see on social media, because people are just showing the highlight reels. People can put on a persona on social media. So many times people will have an idea of like, this person's a power couple because X, Y, and Z. Then when you really see what's going on behind the scene, you start realizing that they were overcompensating all this time, that their relationship was actually a hot mess, but they didn't want you to see it. So they kept on showing in excessive pictures of themselves and whatever it might be to give this perception to others that they are the best and the perfect couple. Overcompensation is rooted in inferiority. The concept was developed by psychologist Alfred Adler, who theorized that feelings of inferiority in childhood lead people to set a fictional goal of superiority to compensate. This is what we often see with narcissists. I often tell people that because when people always say that this person is a narcissist, they love themselves too much. I'm like, no, narcissists actually do not love themselves. This is a common misconception. Narcissists feel inferior, and because they feel inferior, they're going to set a fictional goal, as Adler said, of superiority to compensate. So the reason why they're being so grandiose about themselves and talking about themselves in this great way is because they don't want you to see how inferior they feel. They probably do feel like a failure. They feel defective, but they're trying to cover it by overcompensating and showing how great they are. So narcissists actually do not love themselves. They usually feel a feeling of self-worthlessness and lack of self-love, which is what's leading them to behave in this certain way. Overcompensation is a way of protecting oneself of being seen as worthless by other people. And this can be destructive because they usually causes you to mask your true feelings. This is the issue with overcompensation, because overcompensation doesn't have to be the extreme of what narcissists do. Overcompensation can be many times in different ways when we know that we're very sad, but we'll do everything to make people think that we're happy. We'll always make sure that we're the life of the party and always smiling because we don't want people to see how sad we really are. That's also a form of overcompensating. And when we do this, we are masking our true feelings. And when you're masking your true feelings, this is going to cause harm to yourself because you're not allowing yourself to process your feelings and work through whatever it is that you're going through. This defense mechanism can prevent an individual from addressing and dealing with the original insecurity directly. Then the overcompensator behaviors tend to be very prideful. People who are prideful and overcompensate do not like to be around people who challenge and confront them. And of course, this is often what we see with narcissists. They blame others and take no accountability because they are trying hard to make sure that you don't think that they're worthless. They would think that taking accountability will make you see some type of failure or mistake by them. But making mistakes doesn't make you less than anyone. Making mistakes is normal, and that's actually how we grow. However, people who are overcompensators, they become excessive trying to convince themselves and others that the opposite is true. For example, if this person has a falling out in a relationship and something hurts them, instead of being honest and saying that they're hurt, they'll pretend to be like, yeah, I don't care. I don't need people in my life. I don't care if that person stopped talking to me. And they pretend that the opposite is true when deep down they actually really do care that this person left and they really do feel hurt. And if you keep putting that mask on, then now you're never dealing with that pain that you felt from the ending of that friendship or relationship, which is always going to be harmful for you in the long run. Overcompensators will feel, act, and think as if they are special, superior, perfect, or infallible because these provide alternatives to feeling humiliated, criticized, and devalued. They don't want to feel those ways. So they'd rather be grandiose and pretend to be special and superior so they don't feel humiliated, criticized, or devalued. However, those might be the true feelings that they're feeling that, once again, is not being worked on and focused on because they rather wear a mask rather than deal with what's really going on inside of them. And this is why overcompensation is also a form of avoidance. You're not avoiding an event, you're not avoiding a thing, but you're avoiding with dealing with your emotions. This is another way that I see how all the coping styles, the maladaptive coping styles of schema therapy working together, and why most of the time people will exhibit all three. I wanted to go over this with biblical truth and wisdom and psychology. So I gave you the psychology. Now I want to go into how we see schema therapy, or schemas, I should say, at play in the Bible. Now, there are several characters who exhibit these behaviors that can be interpreted as overcompensation or perceived weakness or insecurity. King Saul, he was the first king of Israel who struggled with insecurity and jealousy. Now, that we can see. I mean, there was many times he kept trying to kill King David, and he was jealous of David because David had more fame than him and more popularity than him, and the people loved him. He also had insecurities that caused him to people please often. There were times where in 1 Samuel chapter 13, we see him overstepping his bounds, and he made an offering that he was not supposed to make because he was afraid of losing the people. He was afraid of what the people would think about him. So he did something that God did not tell him to do and ended up disobeying God and losing his favor with God. So he was very self-reliant and relied on himself because of probably some perceived inadequacy that he felt that he had, and try to take control. Because that's another thing that overcompensation will do. It will cause you to try to take control in some ways to also cover up your insecurities. So control can also be a sign that somebody is overcompensating or dealing with some level of insecurity. And when it comes to speaking to that, I want to bring up 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. That says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness." I think this scripture helps us to understand that we should be willing to acknowledge our weakness and sometimes boast in our weakness, because it is in our weakness that Christ makes us strong, and there could be power in our weakness because God can and will use our weaknesses for his purpose and to help make us bold. But however, when we don't want to show our weaknesses, that lead us into pride, which would then lead us to fall away from God. And not that the Bible tells us that God resists the proud. He cannot do anything with the proud because the proud are self-reliant. They're only relying on themselves anyway. They're not relying on God. So God will not be able to use them. However, when you are willing to lay down your weaknesses, see your weaknesses, and give it to God, then he can take your weaknesses and turn them into strengths as you lean on him. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly in my weaknesses, knowing that the power of Christ dwells in me and can use those weaknesses. And how do we see fear and avoidance in the Bible? Now, we see many places where people, wanted to avoid something. Moses did not want to go to Pharaoh and tell them that he must let God's people go, but he did it anyway. Gideon, when God called Gideon, he was fearful and was like, how am I supposed to, I'm the least in my family, I can't do this. But he did what God called him to do. But even though he tore down the altar of Baal that his father put up, like God told him to do, he did it at nighttime because he was fearful of the people and knew how the people would react. But he still did it. He still did it, but it did show that he had some fear. So there are certain places in the Bible where we do see people with fear, but we also see how God allows them to get through their fears anyway. One of the stories that I feel like we could see the whole entire concept of schema playing out is in the story with the 2 spies in Numbers chapter 13. There was Caleb and 2 other spies. Caleb came with good report, and he said in verse 30 of Numbers 13, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. So Caleb came with a good report and said we could overcome it. However, there were two spies who came with an unfavorable report. In verse 32, they said that land that we have gone through as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great size. There we saw the Nephilim, and to ourselves we seem like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them. They do see themselves in a way that nobody really told them that they were grasshoppers to them. But however, there was some truth to it. They were actually giants. The Nephilims were actually giants. So in reality, they were actually bigger. But this goes next back to what I was saying earlier, that reality does not really matter. It's what you believe that matters. Because in reality, they were bigger. But however, we do see another story where in reality, somebody was a giant. But however, the person's response was different. And we see this with King David. David was also faced with a giant, but because he believed in the God that he served and in the power of that God, his reactions and response to this giant was different than those two spies' reaction to the giants that they saw, showing that people can be faced with the same situation, but have a different reaction based on what they believe. For Numbers, they were faced with giants and they saw themselves as grasshoppers. They said, we seem like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them. So they labeled themselves this way, because they were spying out the land. I'm sure no one said this to them. Because they had the belief that they were grasshoppers, that's what then caused the fear. Caleb didn't see it that way. That's why he didn't have fear, because he too had belief in the God that pretty much saved them, that pretty much delivered them out of the hands of Egypt. And this was the issue that Israel had. Now, many times we like to be hard on Israel when we read the Old Testament, but we do it all the time. What we see at play in the desert is that there are dysfunctional belief and schemas at play. The dysfunctional schemas and beliefs that they had when they were in Egypt did not all of a sudden disappear. We see this all the time with people who have money, but because they still have a poverty mindset or a scarcity mindset, they hoard the money or they end up losing the money because of the way that they think. Because just because you change the circumstances around you or do something different, if your mindset don't change, your mindset, your belief is eventually going to affect how it is that you do whatever it is that you do, and can therefore take you away from the promised land, which is what it did from the people in Israel. The people in Israel didn't get to enjoy the promised land because their dysfunctional schemas and beliefs kept getting in the way with them and the Lord had to slowly, because schemas don't change overnight. I mean, God can do whatever he wants, but then that wouldn't really help them. This is a process that we have to learn how to do in order so that we can stand strong as human beings. I do believe there's a reason why God doesn't just do everything for us, because we would not learn anything, we would not grow, and we would not be to the best of our abilities if God just did everything for us. And we are not going to be able to have dominion the way he tells us to in this world if we don't learn these many different things that we need to learn while we're on this earth. And so what I'm saying about Israel is that there was a lot of schema at play with them. What schemas do we see? One, they surrendered to the belief that they are small and like grasshoppers, which then caused fear. The fear then led to avoidance. They didn't want to go into the land. They kept themselves from going into land when they heard that these people were big, and the spies led people to believe that they would fail if they tried to take the land. Israel believed them, and that then they surrendered to that belief and avoided doing what it is that God called them to do and taking the land that God already told them that he was going to give them. So avoidance will then keep the fear and dysfunctional belief alive. Here we can see what the people of Israel believed about themselves, and they surrendered to the belief that they were small, which led them to fear and avoidance. No one said that they were grasshoppers, but because they saw themselves as grasshopper, this then filled them with fear. This then caused them to cry and complain about it in chapter 14. Fear is one of the biggest weapons of the enemy. When you break out of your fear, you can finally then live in the purpose God has for you. And I can guarantee you that if when it comes to all your dreams, visions, plans, or goals, there is a fear coming up that's probably going to come to stop you. Because Job had to face his biggest fear, and I think that was a blessing for him. In Job chapter 3, verse 25, it says, Job feared losing everything, and he feared divine punishment or turning from God, which he tried to avoid by continually making sacrifices. Now, Job was not in fact being punished by God, but that was what he thought up until the end when God spoke to him. But these were the things he feared, and it happened. In Job chapter 3, actually, let me read that for you too. Job chapter 3, verse 25, he said, what I feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened. So here we can see that Job is saying that whatever he feared has come upon him. And many times, whatever it is that we fear in life will come upon us. And that's why it's best for us to learn how to deal with our fear. Because when it does come upon us, it can really destroy us, or it can be a blessing for us. Because I do believe that Job being faced with his fear was a blessing for him, because now that he was faced by his fears, or now that he faced his fear, well, it wasn't a choice. So I guess now that he was faced by his fears, he was now free of them. I do believe that at the end, he no longer had to dread this torment from God, because he had this experience with God that let him know that God's not going to punish him for doing one less of a sacrifice that he did, that he thought he was supposed to do. That God is not here just tallying up when he's going to punish, when is he not going to punish. And he no longer had to fear that anymore. He no longer had to fear losing the things that he thought he was going to lose, because he already faced that trouble. And many times when we do finally face our fears, we do start to realize, oh, it's not as bad as we thought. And this is one of the things that happens with exposure therapy. With exposure therapy, most of the time when people start to do it properly and expose themselves little by little to what they're fearful of, the response usually is, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And that's the goal, for you to see that it actually wasn't as bad as you thought, because more times than not, it isn't as bad as you thought. Most of the time we make a mountain out of these things because our imagination and our beliefs makes it so big that we run away thinking that that's what's best for us. But then what's really best for us is being able to overcome those fears, because when we don't overcome those fears would put us into bondage. Job also overcompensated a bit. At first, in the beginning of the book, you see him speaking about all the good things that he did and not understanding why he was facing this trouble. He was kind of boastful a little bit. And this experience then challenged his beliefs, and he had a new experience with God, a new encounter with God, which then developed a new love and appreciation for God that he did before. And this is why, another reason why I say I think it was actually a blessing that he dealt with his fear. We shouldn't allow unhealthy relationship with fear to be the status quo for our lives. We should ask ourselves the question, what is it that we are fearful of, and what is it that we're trying to run away from? Because back in Numbers chapter 13, when we continue reading to verse 14, when the people of Israel got afraid, their plan was to go back to Egypt. Their greatest plan was to go back to slavery. And that's the thing. When we allow fear to overtake our life, slavery seems like the best thing for us. We bring ourselves back into slavery. We bring ourselves back into bondage, and not realizing that we are shackled by our fears, and the fears is bringing us into more and more shackles because we are afraid to face the thing that we are afraid of. Because the enemy will find your fears and he will use it against you. And this is why I do agree and believe that we have to work on getting rid of all the fears in our lives, because he will find out what they are and use it, because fear can fuel the kingdom of darkness. And this is one of the reasons why I think he often uses trauma against us as well, because trauma causes fear. And this is one of the reasons why healing your trauma is a huge part of your deliverance, and being able to cast down those strongholds. And the enemy knows that all he has to do is plant that seed, and he will try and plant it in you at a very early age. So as you grow up, it will sprout up at different times, just because that pattern is going. So a lot of times when we're dealing with things in our present life, it's probably a seed that the enemy might not even be doing anything now, but he probably planted a seed a long time ago that he knew would continue to grow, because you're continuing to feed that belief, that unhealthy belief. You're continuing to feed that fear that starts to sprout out and to grow into other things that start to affect your life. Now you have avoidance, procrastination, you're overwhelmed, you're anxious, and these things are now wreaking havoc in your life. And sometimes we could cut the branches but never get to the root. And because you don't get to the root or the deep core belief of your insecurity, that's why even when you cut the branch, you thought you dealt with it, but it's going to grow up again and grow back up again and spring back up again until you deal with the root. And this is the issue we see illustrated with the people of Israel. You can see their insecurities, their weaknesses, their dysfunctions at their core. You can see their core belief and patterns at play. And if we are honest, we will see it in ourselves too. And this is why Romans chapter 12 verse 2 says we must be transformed by the renewing of our mind. Because many of us, our problems were planted when we were children, and it's being reflected now in our lives. So, and for those of us who do not reflect, really look into ourselves, be honest, and face our troubles, we continue living with bad roots affecting our lives. When we are faced with a giant, we can be bold and trust in the God we serve like David did, or we can run in fear like the Israelites wanted to do when they saw the Nephilims. We could run and try to take control, because that's what they always tried. That's what they also was trying to do. They were trying to take control of the situation, appoint someone as the leader so they could go back into Egypt. And we could see that if they had their way, their best idea of solving their problem will put them right back into bondage. When we do not face our fears and when we run and hide, we choose to go back into our bondage. But Jesus came to set us free. God promised them a land flowing with milk and honey. God promised them freedom and prosperity if they obeyed, but they kept choosing slavery. When you try to control everything, it puts you into bondage, into slavery, because you cannot control everything. It makes you shackled into this belief that you have that if only I could get everything perfect, then everything will be happy. Then I will be happy. But you're never going to get everything perfect, so therefore you're never going to be happy. And it's just a vicious cycle that people live in. When you max what it is that you are really feeling, you put up a front and you are living in bondage. Because if you're hiding is whatever it is that you're really truly feeling, then how can you really be free? You're not free to express yourself. You're not free to be true to who you are. You're creating a fictional character of yourself to try to hide these flaws. There's absolutely no freedom in that. So when we do not trust in God, but ourselves and our abilities that has so many limits, we will end up choosing slavery, forfeiting the power of God that should be in you once you got saved. So we forfeit our sound mind and a peace that surpasses all understanding that only comes from the Lord. We forfeit love because you are too afraid to let go, because love is risky. And fear is also a thief. And this is why the enemy loves fear, because the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And if he cannot kill you, then he will rob you of your destiny. If he cannot kill you, he will rob you of your peace. If he cannot kill you, he will rob you of your joy. And most importantly, he will try to rob and destroy your relationship with God. If there is fear in your life, cast that spirit out of your life. Allow the power of God to move in and transform your mind and your beliefs to have the mind of Christ so you can walk, talk, think, and be just like Jesus. Never walking in fear and living out your destiny. And remember the words that God said to his servant Joshua multiple times throughout the Bible. These words I also leave with you. In Joshua chapter 1, verse 9, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So I pray that the Lord will strengthen you and fill you with courage to face all the fears you have in this world and to complete what it is that he calls you to complete. Because another thing is fear. If you have fear, you cannot do what it is that the Lord tells you to do. He tells us to go out, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. How are you going to do that if you're fearful of talking to people? If you're fearful of being around people? He tells us to go and set the captives free, bring healing, casting out demons. How are you going to do that if you're fearful? And this is another way that fear takes away our love. Because when you see somebody suffering, you should want to set them free. But if you're in fear, the fear takes away the love that you can now show your neighbor. This is another way that fear robs us. That's why I pray that God will give you the courage you need to do the things that he calls you to do, because the things he calls you to do will require boldness and it will require courage. But know that the Lord is with you and he will strengthen you to do what he called you to do. If this was helpful for you, let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and push the bell notification so you can be notified whenever I put out a new video, giving you more information about mental health and the Word of God. And until next time, take care.